So I'm going to keep this introduction really short because this is an invitation-only event. You guys should have an idea of what's going on. But for those of you that don't know me, I'm Becky. I'm the executive director here at HIFF. And this is our new office. We just moved in here a few months ago. Present this private conversation with you all today. I am going to talk a little bit about who's in the room today. We obviously we have a very limited number of chairs and a very small space. So we sort of curated the people here. There are a few local cinematographers. You guys want to? Yeah, okay. There are a few local cinematographers. And some of the HIFF Hokie mentees cohort, thank you. And Hokie stands for the Hawaii Online Creators and Critics Immersive Program. So it's a program that we do to continue to diversify thought leadership and writing and criticism in film in Hawaii. So I know I have some Hokie people back here. Raise your hands, guys. All right. Over there, yeah. And we have other filmmakers from our New Americans Perspectives program right here. So you guys are going to be all on a panel later today together. And then we have our Makavalu. So HIFF is working on a film that we are going into production on next year that was created through a lab with 8 Native Hawaiian writer-directors, and they wrote a feature film script together. So Makavalu filmmakers, raise your hands. Woo! And then we have a few HIFF board members and filmmakers in their own right as well. Did I forget anybody? Well, everyone here is very important, and I'm going to let Anne take it over from here. We are going to have a short conversation and then open it up for questions because we really want to involve you guys as much as possible. So thank you to everyone on stage. Thank you to the Vilcek Foundation for being a partner in all of this, and enjoy.
Hello? There we go. Okay. Aloha, everyone. How are you? I've got not only notes, questions,
you have a
but
book
3 pages of your filmography. We have, as you know, very distinguished guests, Roger and James Deakins, who are giving us this time today. And we're so excited that you're doing this for us. Thank you so much. I think you know enough about their backgrounds, but I do want to stress that if you haven't heard any of the Team Deakins podcasts, I highly, highly recommend it. It's like going to film school, actually, but in the best way possible. And could you just say a few words, perhaps, about what initiated that, and sort of it's been going for a few years already, and. Yes.
I think we've always had a website, which was also a way of giving back information, but we were doing publicity for 1917, and after the Q&As, a lot of people would come up to us and ask us the same questions. So originally we were thinking, we'll do a podcast and just as another sort of resource of information, but then the lockdown came, so we had a lot of time, so did everybody else, and so we started having conversations with different filmmakers, some of whom we'd never even met before. And a friend of ours said to me, it reminds me of, it's like sitting in your house for dinner and eavesdropping on conversations, because we used to have these big dinners with cinematographers and other people, and that became, at least in my mind, the idea of what we should make it. And so it's really important to us that it be a conversation, because we're also learning from whoever we're talking to.
Yeah, I wish we'd have started it earlier, because all those people that are the dinner conversation sadly are not with us anymore, like Connie Hall and Vilmos and Haskell and people, and they would have been wonderful on the podcast. But anyway, yeah. But it's been great for us because, as James says, during lockdown, we were talking to people like Alexei Rodionov, who was the cinematographer on the film called Come and See, which every film student or actually filmmaker should know. If they don't, they should see it right away. So we got to talk to these people that have always been, heroes, really, I suppose.
It was great to talk to him because he was in his 80s, and it was like talking to a little guy, a young
it was
guy
like
who is so enthusiastic.
Like he shot it the day before.
Yeah,
He's going,
he
and
knew
then I did
everything.
this, and it was all handheld. And he was talking about how he went to America to learn Steadicam under Garrett Brown.
Yeah.
And it was like 1985, and it was, it was really wonderful. So it's there on the podcast. If you want to listen to him, he's a great guy.
That's terrific. Yes, and for sure, people's personalities come out in their voices, right? Yeah. One theme that I've noticed that you're not only demonstrating with your podcast, but that you're actually articulating it, is the idea of collaboration, and also about creative approaches and how it's trying to be connected to something a bit bigger than just the project, and about relationships. And perhaps you could comment on that.
I think both of us strongly believe that making a movie is a collaboration, and it's not just us and the director, but it's the prop person. It's everyone has a role to play in making a movie, and that's the exciting thing, because you come in with one idea, and as it progresses, the idea gets better and better just because of the input from other people.
Yeah, also, not everybody's going to be Marty Scorsese, are they? Let's face it. Not everybody can be a director. I could never direct. I found that out at film school. But I'm still part of something that I think is, I kind of love. I love filmmaking, so I'm glad to be a part of it. And, as James says, everybody that's involved is important in their own way, and you especially find that working, well, you've been lucky working with like Joel and Ethan and that, and everybody on their crew is appreciated for what they do. That's how it should be.
Wonderful. I wanted to touch a little bit about sort of what you mentioned as the way of seeing, as a person's way of seeing, and how your roots may have affected sort of this framework of how you started on that journey of understanding what your own way of seeing is, because that gets portrayed in sort of how you frame and such, even though you're working in collaboration with a director's vision and
You have to bring something to the table.
Yes,
so.
exactly. And then you can't help but bring sort of your context, your story with you in some respect, your experience, right? So, James, you started, from what I heard from the podcast, that you started in college putting together some multimedia pieces, and that got you thinking about storytelling. And then you were able to get, you segued into working for a film lab, right, which is a highly technical side. And then went into being a post-production supervisor before going into script supervising, right?
It was interesting because when I was doing the multimedia shows, we were doing it for the university, some friends and I. And we did a couple of them, and then we did this one, and it was a Southern university, so we did this one on rape. And they didn't want us to say that you could know the person who might rape you, because there were a lot of very inexperienced young women coming to college, and they just wanted to protect them, but we weren't allowed to say you might know someone or something. And so I thought about it and realized if we do the whole show with very distinguished landmarks of the university that everyone knows, that's bringing it home to them that, wait a minute, this is something I know. So it started making me think how the visual can actually tell the story without any words, because the university wouldn't allow us to say those words.
Right. So that restriction actually pushed you to be creative about it, which is actually a huge tool in filmmaking, right? It's the constant set of challenges that come up in film production. Yeah. Wonderful. And Roger, I think I heard that your mother was a painter, and that you did do, your interest was in photography, documentary work, and you had perhaps a teacher that was kind of a mentor in the photography side?
That's kind of all of a bit of exaggeration.
From you?
My mother died when I was very young, but she did sort of teach me painting, and I didn't really know what I was going to do. I mean, I tried to avoid doing anything, so I went to art college. I mean, really, I didn't know what I was going to do. I just thought, art college, it was the late 60s, the first year in art college, we all went on strike because we didn't want to go to the classes they were sending us to, and in Paris, they were all in the Sorbonne, they were all on strike, so we went on strike. So it was kind of like that. I didn't know what I was going to do. But then, at art college, I met Roger Main, photographer. And I think, he kind of inspired me to take up a camera, really. So at that point, I was intending to be a photographer, still photographer, photojournalist. And then, just by chance, a fellow student was applying to the National Film School, which was opening for the first time in the UK. And it sounded like a really good deal, and it would be a way of avoiding work for another 4 years. So I applied to National Film School and didn't get in. But then, another piece of luck, I got a job at an art centre photographing rural life in my home county. And then the next year I got into the film school. So I managed to avoid doing a proper job for a very long time. And I left film school, and gradually I started getting work in film. So.
Yeah. And I mean, according to your podcast too, I think you were talking about the sort of serendipity of life in terms of things seem to work out.
Yeah, that's what I was trying
blessings.
to kind of put across right there, because
right.
I started out, I could have been working on a trawler, I could have been working at my dad's building site, anything. So it is kind of weird how life takes you.
And that year off, like, quote, you didn't get into film school, but that year off provided you the opportunity to actually hone in and focus in on the idea of your self-instinct of framing, right? Taking pictures. And probably, I would imagine that year probably gave you a foundation of a bit of confidence too before going into film school about way of seeing, your own way of seeing.
Yeah, also, I wasn't ready to go to the film school at that point. I mean, I was, and probably still am a bit, but I was definitely back there a very shy person. I wouldn't have coped in film school. And even it was hard when I went, because I was very much a rural person. I was from the country, and to go to London and be with a lot of people that had been to university and then had gone on to film school, or come out of the industry and gone to film school and learn more and stuff, it was kind of quite overwhelming for a while.
Mm-hmm. And then I know this is a hard topic because, so much of us do go to film school, and you had the benefit of film school. I think you went in on the second year that the film school actually opened in the UK, right? Which is kind of a tremendous thing in the sense that you've seen so much of the shift and the development and the change of film, not only in the UK, but also internationally. And that gave you sort of a space to be able to work with the medium. That, I think you had mentioned in the podcast that you had worked on quite a few sort of diverse types of films, not only narrative but documentaries, obviously film format, but the lengths being even quite long, like an hour long. So you've gotten this sort of dexterity before leaving school, and that was probably the way to get it then, right? That was the opportunity to do that, was through film school.
I think also film school allows you to make mistakes, as opposed to if you're...
I didn't make any mistakes. How dare you?
I'm not talking about you. Because it's kind of hard when you're being paid. You're not supposed to make a mistake.
Yeah, and then in terms of access to, it's very different now that we have digital and such, and that things are so much more readily available in terms of technology to be able to not go to film school and be making films. But at that time, I think that was that was the fortune, right? That was the fortune to be able to go.
I think the lesson I learned at film school was the same lesson I learned when I was at art college when I met Roger Main. The first thing he said to us, we were printing photographs in the darkroom, and the first thing he said is, "I can't teach you to be a photographer." you know, we can take photographs, you take photographs, and we can talk about them. We're trying to understand how it's interpreting what you're seeing, but I can't teach you to do it. And that same thing happened at film school. Some of the tutors, not all of them, but some of them say, yeah, I can't teach you to do this. You've just got to find it. You know, just got to play with the medium and find something.
Yeah. And that speaks a lot to you acknowledging that there's a personal, like, the way of seeing that we all need to find for ourselves, in the sense of understanding, you know, how we want to not only see the world, but how we want to frame the world for others to see, what sort of grace we want to show the world, right?
I think that's really important, and I think a lot of people try and copy. They say, okay, we put up lighting diagrams on our website, but we don't want them to copy it. It's just an idea of what you could do, because when you're taking somebody else's idea and copying it, you're not developing your own way of looking, as you say, or seeing.
The thing I learned early on, actually, I was at a cinema in Torquay on a rainy summer's day watching Fat City, and there was only about 4 other people in the theatre, and Fat City shot by Conrad Hall, and it was at the end. I thought, this is so edgy for its time, and I looked at the name Conrad Hall, and I thought, no, who's that? He did In Cold Blood, which I'd seen at that time, and Tell 'Em Willie Boy Is Here, which is a wonderful movie that people don't really talk about much. But he realized that there's something about, he's not the director, but you can tell he shot these different films. You know, there's something of a personality that goes into it, which I think is really kind of interesting, I think.
We were shooting a film, and there was a Thanksgiving break, and we decided not to go home during the Thanksgiving break. So what we did is we went to the video store back then and rented all these Outer Limits. And because Connie had shot a lot of the Outer Limits, but they didn't do the credits on the beginning, and some he hadn't shot. So we would watch them and say, okay, Connie did that one. And we could guess which ones he had done, and
And we could, the other guy was, I forget the other cinematographer, but you could tell the two apart, you know, but there was obviously sometimes they were the same director doing it.
Yeah, wonderful. I mean, I think that speaks to sort of, obviously there's this vision, the director's vision that a cinematographer is trying to support and translate and communicate, but at the same time, it's hard to take yourself completely out of yourself, right? Otherwise, you're just, I mean, then anybody could do it. But,
well, otherwise it just becomes technical.
Yes, that's what I mean.
There's no interest in that, really.
Yeah.
I mean, we've, you know, I've gone to interviews with certain directors that I know are going to be very specific what the shot and the frame is and what the lens is going to be. And even though I like them and admire them work, I wouldn't find it interesting at all to be part of that project, you know.
Yeah.
We also talked to a director one time about a movie that looked very interesting on paper, but at one point while we were talking to him, he said, because I asked him, are you going to do very specific shots, because it was a very strange movie. He goes, yeah, but then we'll shoot a lot of footage and I'll figure it out afterwards.
Oh, no.
And that's like, okay, do that with someone else.
Okay, yeah. Coming back to the way of seeing, there's a film by Wim Wenders on the social photographer Salgado called The Salt of the Earth. Have you seen that?
I haven't seen it, I know.
Yeah, it's lovely. And there's one concept they talk about, which is the idea of the compassionate eye. The dialogue, the context to this was that, you know, the question was like, how do you get these photographs where there's people who aren't used to being photographed, who seem like they can be themselves authentically? And the term compassionate eye, to have a compassionate eye of the photographer actually mirrors or translates or enables the subject to be able to show themselves more freely. And I thought that was such a important concept, I think, not only for documentarians, but I think even in narrative work to, you know, in terms of that sort of philosophy of approach or attitude on the camera department side to be sort of gracious really can also affect what you're capturing, you know?
Oh, it's interesting you mentioned Wim Wenders at the
Yeah,
same time as
yeah.
Salgado, because I think one of the most compassionate films, feature films ever made is Wings of Desire.
Yes, yeah,
You know,
yeah.
and just, the film's relationship to
Yes.
character and people and,
Yeah.
you know, what's going on in their heads,
Right,
obviously, you know.
Right, and sort of the grace that, and the universality of people too, even though we have very specific inner thoughts, right? And how you show that visually and in a narrative. Yeah, that was one of my sort of like early loves, was that film for sure.
It's also on the podcast because we talked to Wim Wenders as well.
Oh,
It was
yeah.
really great. And I could ask him about goalkeeper's fear of the penalty kick, which is also one of my favorite films when I was starting out.
Wonderful, wonderful. So that's actually a perfect segue to talk a little bit about sort of the collaboration that happens between the cinematographer or the camera team and the director. Could you speak a little bit about like because there's a lot of directors in this room, as well as cinematographers, about what helps you, coming from the directing side, what helps you to be able to make that connection, to be able to contribute, to be useful to a project, you know, to see the vision? What helps you from the director's side?
I mean, that's a hard one, really. I mean, it's really about, it's about a relationship with somebody as a person, you know, outside of it being just for a film. So it's having a similar point of view on the world, I suppose, really, isn't it, you know?
Well, and also being able to communicate, a
Yeah.
person that's able to go back and forth with you.
For me, I mean, I'm drawn to somebody that has a passion for what they're doing. And I mean,
Yeah.
there are some, let's face it, there's some directors that do it because it's hooray for Hollywood, you know. I mean, I don't know. I don't know why they're doing it sometimes.
Yeah. Do you feel like, I mean, you can
Sorry,
have
but
the pick of anybody, really, but do you feel like at this point you're still looking at the story first, or do you talk to the director first? And it's because you trust the director that you'll go onto a project even without reading
well,
it?
obviously with Joel and Ethan, it's sort of different having
Yeah.
a relationship, but no, it's always about the project, the script.
Okay.
I mean, I don't, unless you relate to it, I don't kind of, yeah.
But it's interesting because the first script that we did with Denis, we read, and it could have been directed either way. It could have been a real sort of gothic horror film, or it could have been more like what we saw it. And that's sometimes what you do when you meet with the director the first time before you've taken the job, is to talk about the script and see how they're seeing it. But with Denis, we knew his films and knew that he would do something very interesting.
Right, right.
But
His
it
previous
is-
film had been on Sandy, and
Yeah,
he was
right.
doing
Yeah, yeah.
Prisoners, so I mean,
Yeah.
it was like, it was a no-brainer, really.
Wonderful. And then in terms of the pre-production process, I'm sure it's different with each director, but for the Coen brothers, is it something where, because there's two directors, they're worked out quite a bit before they come to you in terms of like the shot design or thinking about the way that something's going to be covered? Or do you,
That's varied with Joel and Ethan, because
Yeah.
sometimes like on Barton Fink, when I first started working with them, we were sitting together doing the storyboards together from the start. Since then, most films, sometimes Ethan would come in and they'd have done a little sort of like stick figure storyboards, and then we would sit down and talk through all of that. Other times they would come with more detailed storyboards, and we'd sit and go through them in pre-production, but it depends, because they were in New York and we'd be in LA. Sometimes you didn't have that amount of prep, but things would really be sort of settled on during 5 weeks usually of prep time, where you're talking script, but you're also looking at locations, and then you're discussing the way the scenes are going to be broken down on location, you know. With Denis, for instance, so it's very much you're sitting in a room and you're on Prisoners, we had, say, 3 or 4 weeks doing storyboards together and kind of working things out and looking at locations. And we both we liked that process so much on Sicario. I remember Denny locked the office door so he couldn't get interrupted while we were working on storyboard. So it just changes, you know. First film we did with Sam Mendes, I thought, Conrad Hall had said, oh, Sam likes to really prep and work from storyboards, and he found it a little restricting, frankly. And so on Jarhead, I was thinking Sam would come in with all these storyboards, and the first thing he said was, I want to just, why don't we shoot this handheld? And why don't we just shoot it like a documentary and work with the actors on the day and figure it out? And I thought, well, great, yeah, you know.
But Denis has a really interesting take on prep, because he says prep is the time where you get to dream. And so, which is such a freedom, because you can suggest any idea and just hope there's not a producer behind you listening and then running off and booking the army tank that you mentioned that's a really bad idea.
Right. Yes. There's another key person that you're probably collaborating with in the prep too, is the production designer, right? How much do you what kind of dialogue do you have between director, yourselves, and the production design team?
Well, usually you're there all together, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, on some films, the designer goes on first, and on other films, like on Blade Runner, we were sitting with Denny months before Dennis came on, because I think Dennis was on another movie apart from anything else. And we had done the prep period on Prisoners and Sicario by time of Blade Runner, so Denny loved that process. So as James said, we sat in a hotel room in Montreal. He was cutting Arrival in the mornings, and we were working with a storyboard artist, and he would come in the afternoons, and we would just sort of, you know, work like that all through it.
But I also think that one of the important things with that trio is that a lot of times the director might be incredibly busy, and certain things change, and we might know that actually that scene's out, or that scene's going to be that, or he or she, the production designer, knows something that we don't know. So we kind of visit each other's offices a lot, saying, did you hear that actually we're not going to have a cafe now? And those kind of things are really important to share.
Right.
Well, also knowing what's going to be in show and what's not, you know, and you know, the worst thing is, and Joel and Ethan would always get really upset on this if they would find a set was built in 360 degrees, but they only wanted 2 angles.
And they had said that.
They're so kind of like, we want to put all the money on the screen. They would get really upset if any part of the set was built that they didn't need.
But on the other
all
hand,
that communication.
On the other hand, if a production designer is working with the director, there are directors who say, no, we will only look this way, and then we get there on the day and say, but let's get a shot that way.
No.
So we've talked with production designers about it.
Right.
How in the world do you know?
Right.
And you know, they have to guess, and so sometimes they do build something.
You know, like when Jess Goncha started working with Joel and Ethan, we said to them, no, when Joel and Ethan said, that's the shot, don't worry, they won't turn around.
They've got a lot of intention going in. Okay, wonderful. You know, I just love that we got to see Blade Runner 2049 again on the big screen last night. And I was just so impressed by the concept of the moving light. It was just so stunning. It was stunning, but also I was thinking, God, that must have been really exceptionally difficult to time, with the editing, but also just sort of in terms of the shot, because of the moving light. I'm talking about especially around the Wallace building, you know, where you had mentioned that there was the concept was the idea of the artificial sun. And it's almost like an oppressive sun, you know, and that anyone that's inside of that space is sort of like this small organism compared to this oppressive sun that's casting these geometric shapes within the building and such. But just sort of that care that went into the design of the lighting, is that something you discuss with the director, or is it more with you and production design and the gaffing team, the gaffer who you've had for many films, right?
Yeah, I mean, actually, the gaffer on that was Bill O'Leary, who I'd first met on Sid and Nancy in New York when he was a practical electrician. And he was just so good at doing these little gags in like the Chelsea Hotel in New York and stuff. I thought on the rest of the film we took him to LA, and then next time I worked in America I rang him up and asked if he would be gaffer, and that was the first film he gaffed, and yeah, we worked together a lot since then.
But it wasn't a design that just came to you like
No,
that.
no,
It was
no,
a
no.
couple of months of talking about it all the time and waking up in the middle
Yeah.
of the night and saying, no, what if we use these lights?
Yeah, I mean, because like
We're
it's one thing
obsessed.
having the it's the one thing having the idea and visually seeing it in your head. It's another thing creating it, because in that Wallace office with the big water, I mean, none of those, there was no moving lights. It was all done on a chase with like T12 lamps, tungsten lamps, but they were in a big circle and they chased, so it felt like one lamp, but it was just like a dissolve from one to another and around in this circuit. And stuff like that's really kind of hard to work out. That was one scene where it was on the wall. The second scene where it's, there's the water caustics on the wall, and there's a revolving light that actually we left in shot, and thankfully Denny asked me in the wide shot if I wanted that light in, and he left it in and then painted out the rig. But the rig that's doing the effect of the it's like 320 separate little lights, and again it's a chase built into it that's coming around. So it's not the easiest thing to work out technically, you know what I mean?
Yeah, because you went through, should it be a true circle? Should it be an oval? I remember these,
no.
because it was usually...
How big, to work it out, the space on the thing. And I think, as I said last night, when, I had this big circle and I had all the light worked out, and I had the chairs set on the set where they should be, and Harrison comes in, and when they're rehearsing and he moves the chair, and I go, oh, no, you can't do that. So I moved it back when he wasn't looking.
Yeah. So obviously that's working with the production design team, but then not knowing necessarily, or just also having to think about, what does happen once the actors are in and the director is working with them. Do things shift? Do things change? And you've built a set around this lighting. So
Yeah, I mean, the idea of that set came from an image we found online that was a sort of brutalist design of a building, and it had these high windows. So I was talking to Dennis Gassner, the designer, about we wouldn't ever see the windows, but I wanted that effect. Yeah. And the water came from, I think it was Denny was in a Japanese restaurant one night, and it was like had a big pool, and he just thought that's really, So all these things
so
come from different ways.
Yeah.
But also that rig couldn't have worked necessarily with another director, because with Denis, if you go to him and say, but it means that the choreography can't change, if he says yes, that's great. But a lot of directors might say yes and then on the day go, why are you making me do this?
Right.
I mean, they should be over there, and then they're in the dark. So
One of the big advantages of shooting digital is also you can show the director what dark actually is. Denny likes dark, so that's good. But some directors, when you say, do you mind if it's in silhouette? We shoot this scene in silhouette. If it's Joel and Ethan, we were shooting, I'm thinking No Country for Old Men, the scene outside the cafe at the end where Tommy Lee's and the other sheriff is totally in shadow. Joel and Ethan would be fine with that, but I worked with another director, and he was watching dailies. He said, but I can't see their faces. Well, what is a silhouette? You know what I mean? But if you're shooting digital, you can say, okay, this is it,
That gets me to thinking also about not only the amazing power of lighting and how it influences composition, but that you're sort of in a very unique place in the sense that you're at the caliber of DP work, and you love to camera operate, and in fact the majority of what we see on the screen you've operated. And could you speak a little bit about that in terms of, these films get so big in terms of the amount of resources, crew, technology, and you still want to be able to have that control over the frame. I think it's kind of like wonderful.
If I gave up one, I'd give up lighting. I'd stay operating. But the other thing is, a lot of those times you go for an interview with a director you've not worked with before, and there's a very high-powered director who I really love, but in the old days he liked operating the camera. And we had a lovely conversation, but at the end I said, but you operate the camera, don't you? And he said, yeah, so do you. I said, well, yeah, it's not going to work, is it? And it, because, I mean, I love hiding behind the camera. I don't want to be out there in the open with nothing to hide behind.
And speaking on that, I do want to get just a little bit technical. I noticed that I heard that you like to work with spherical lenses. You've never worked with anamorphic. Can you address the why of that? And also, I'm sure that you've been asked this many times, of sort of the intention that goes with choosing primes,
It forces you to think where the camera is and what lens you're on. I hate that. And you're on a zoom and the director says, well, just close in and do a tighter shot. But why are you doing it on a longer lens? Why are you not moving the camera? So just to shoot on prime lenses, it forces you to be conscious of that relationship with the subject, And as far as anamorphic, I've always shot Arriflex. I did one film on Panavision, but I didn't really want to. But anyway, I've always shot with the most minimal equipment. And that's the other thing. If you've got a small film camera even, but you've got a zoom lens on, suddenly the whole thing gets bigger and bigger. And I came from documentaries originally, and I like that kind of intimacy, So, and that's also partly why I operate. I don't want a lot of people around.
But let's face it, also with anamorphic, you hate flares.
Well,
you
there is
really
that.
hate them.
There is that, but then there's also at the time it was speed,
Yeah.
But the other thing I feel, I want to go back to lighting now. I was just thinking when you were talking, starting in film years ago, you couldn't do what you do now with a digital camera and come in and just shoot with natural light and a few bulbs. You had to light it. And that kind of forced you to think in the same way as, why am I on a 50 as opposed to a 28? It forced you to think, what do you want this to look like? Now there's too much of, I think for me, there's a tendency to say, well, we just use a natural light, it looks great. But why? You're throwing away a whole kind of toolkit, really, of molding and telling the story through the imagery. And so, over the years I've used less light because of faster lenses and camera, whatever. But it's still been about the lighting. So, Blade Runner, it was such a joy to do because it was about the lighting and molding the lighting and taking it somewhere other than pure naturalism. You still want it to feel natural, that is believable, but you're kind of using it in some way to kind of, express something more than just a, flat, nice, soft daylight.
Right.
It's kind of humorous too, because when digital started being more of the choice, all the producers say, well, that's great, we don't need any lights. And
Right. It's a missed opportunity to shape, right? To shape lighting, and also even the use of subtractive lighting to shape lighting as well. I'd like to segue into 1917 in regards to the sort of storytelling device of trying to keep things to a one shot, and how you were still, in a sense, operating, but not. Can you describe that process with working with motion devices and still trying to be the one who is framing?
that was really interesting because a lot of the heads could be remotely operated, and so Roger would be on the wheels and I would be next to Roger and I would be in contact with whoever's carrying the camera. Now they knew, because we'd done so many rehearsals, they knew what the shot should be, but they weren't actually looking through the lenses. But I could say to them, oh, a little bit more to the left or to the right, so they could be in the position that made the operating a little bit better.
But it was a whole, whole process, I mean, I sat with Sam for weeks and weeks, kind of constructing the shot. And then we laid out the sets, like in a field, the trench or the barn or whatever. We'd mark it all out. And then we get the actors in to play the scene. And then I went on with a small Sony camera that matched exactly what the LF would give me with a 40 mil. And I shot the rehearsals, kind of just handheld. But what I wanted to get from them was frames for each moment of the action. So then we did a print out with the images of what the shot was, what we intended the shot to be, the framing of the shot to be. And then that went to the grips or the operators Pete, who was doing Steadicam, or Charlie, who was doing the Trinity, which is, you know, the Steadicam with an arm sort of thing. And so everybody, by the time we came to shoot it, we were all in sync about, you know, what the overall concept was. And as James says, then we were in constant communication as the shot was progressing. So actually the actual shoot was really, really simple.
We also didn't build the sets until we had rehearsed it with the actors, so knew the timing. So we would know that if we were in front of them but then needed to go behind them, there needed to be a side trench right here so we could pull in and go behind. So
wonderful.
It was all set for the shot.
Right, right. So in a sense, it's, as you mentioned in the podcast, you're connecting those key milestone moments, those shots. It's the challenge becomes, how do you connect it? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously some had to be, you know, separated because of location. I mean, we were shooting in Salisbury Plain one moment, and then on a stage set in London, and then we were shooting in Glasgow on the Docklands. You know, so they all had to be connected in some way, so you're forced to do certain things. But at other times, you know, there was a section like in the forest towards the end where the soldiers singing and they're all getting ready to go to the front line. Well, there's a whole complicated move in that forest that ends up in the White Trench, where we knew all that section had to be done on one particular piece of equipment, but then the next section had to be done with another piece of equipment. So we had to build in a join within those two sections.
Right.
And it was an interesting film in that we had a lot of prep, and the other departments were also there. We started shooting in the beginning of April, and in October and November we would be having these production meetings talking about the shots with hair and makeup there and props and all of the departments. And I've never seen that before. And it was great because, of course, a prop person's going to see a shot slightly differently and go, I don't think they should be carrying that if they're doing this. You know, so we had all that information, and also those departments knew exactly what the shots were, because we ended up with schematics of the set and little diagrams of where the camera would be and what the camera rig would be, and just it was all laid out.
Wonderful. I do want to open it up for questions, but I have one more question before I do that. This is from one of my friends who is a DP who wanted to ask, he's not here, wanted me to ask if there were any sort of quote, I know you never make mistakes, but mistakes that might have happened, technical mistakes that might have happened, and how your team assisted you to try to make, it workable, and in that respect too, if there are happy accidents that have happened where you're like, oh my God, this is actually a wonderful thing. Like, let's take this and run with it.
So we do a lot of prep.
Yeah.
I do a lot of prep. I talk through a film with a gaffer and the key grip and everybody else, and Andy, an assistant, and so we're pretty well prepared, and everybody's very good at changing tack if something happens. I'm trying to think for the life of me something very specific I could say to that, but I honestly can't.
Because you know that things have changed on the day, but I can't remember either. Yeah. I mean, if we have a technical problem while we're shooting, the guys will come to me and say, we've got a problem with this, or the editor will call me, and then we figure it out first before we tell Roger, and then I get to choose when I tell Roger. It's not in the middle of a shot.
Right. Okay.
I made one huge mistake of doing a film down somewhere in Alabama, I think it was, And I was in this big football stadium, and the scene was meant to happen with all the crowd coming to the event below these characters talking. And I'd put up all these maxi brutes and crap, as much as I thought we could afford to light this shot. And then people started coming in to get ready down below, and I realized if that was all people, I wouldn't see anything because I didn't have enough light. But luckily, they were, there was a car, kind of like people were, the extras would get a car if they came and that. So that was the draw, but hardly anybody turned up. And the director was really upset because there was nobody there. But I was really happy because there was just a few people in this white concrete below, and it was kind of a nice shot.
Actually worked out for you.
Yeah, it worked out.
Yeah.
You get lucky.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Let's open it up for any questions. Yes.
Hi.
Hello, both. Thank you. So lovely hearing you all chat. I would love to go back to the prep question and how you create your visual world, what your process is for creating the visual world with the director. Whether you like lots of visual references or whether you bring lots of visual references to the table. And yeah, I guess that might be different with different directors.
Yeah, also depends on the movie, on 1917, we had lots of references from the First World War, particular shots that you kind of like talk about. But and a film like Jesse James, we had a huge number of references, but nothing we were copying. That's the thing. It was all kind of like the feeling of this shot, the feeling of that, wasn't it? Yeah, but then other things you don't reference anything. We very rarely reference other movies. It's usually a stills photographer or something, a particular image, or historical images like from, for 1917. Yeah.
Do you find that you use other references, like from other mediums, like even music or fine arts, or?
I mean, sometimes I've had a director play music that is relates to the kind of soundtrack they're thinking about, because that informs the feel of the pace of the film.
On the other hand, No Country for Old Men, they told you right up front,
straight off,
no
music, yeah.
which also informs how.
Yeah. But it's usually photographs of a place or just somebody's photographs that you particularly like, the kind of feel of the composition and the lens length or something, But I say, some films it's a lot of that, and some films nothing at all.
If you guys want to come up and use this mic, okay, we can use this for Q&As, and please introduce yourselves too when you ask questions.
This one works.
Because I turned it off.
It helps if you turn it on.
Talk loud enough, but I'll go. This one? Not this one. Okay. Aloha. My name is Keikama Amona. Mahalo for being here and taking all this time. I guess the question, you actually addressed the one I was going to ask about the sound and that scene in No Country for Old Men when he's in the store and he leaves the wrapper and it just unwraps and you can hear that. It's such an awesome. The other question was, all the films you do are so rewatchable, but especially the two characters in Fargo, the William H. Macy character and Shagur in No Country, because it's such different, but they're so not really that, character you're rooting for. But in the end, especially with Shagur, he's just evil incarnate, but the way you shot him is so, you feel actually compassionate. And like for me, I start questioning, geez, what's wrong with me? Because he's so, you kind of are rooting for him, even though you don't want him to be successful. Are there things you're talking about? It actually does, and so that's why it's good it's a small group and nobody's filming.
Yeah.
But like with the Coen brothers, are you talking about that as part of the process? Like, you know, what if we shoot William H. Macy and Chigurh in certain things to really develop that feel for the audience, to kind of start developing that likability for the character, even though they're not likable.
But I think the thing about Fargo is when you read the script, you kind of go, who's going to want to watch this? Because the Bill Macy's character was so horrible, but their casting, they cast the right person, and of course he's so horribly stupid that you feel so sorry for him, and you end up being able to watch the movie.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. It becomes, I think so much is in the casting and the actors giving you. But I mean, on like No Country, for instance, though, I mean, it's not a horror film. You kind of want the audience to relate to this guy, even though he's kind of the epitome of the devil in a way, isn't he? And does he really exist even? You have those moments where you're not sure if he actually is a ghost, a spirit, or pure evil. But you don't want to lay that on too heavy. So I don't remember Joel and Ethan ever talking about that directly, but it's so obvious in the book, but it's and in the script and their intent. I mean, most of the conversations with them in prep are purely about, well, is that location going to work? Is it too interesting or whatever? You know, I've rarely heard them talk in those kind of more theoretical, deeper character study ways. No,
But
they're not like that. They're very matter of fact. But I know it's going on. But they just let that come out.
But I think Chigurh also was casting because Javier is so great, and you should tell the story about the storyboards and not showing it to the actors in there.
Yeah. I mean, regularly, Joel and Ethan, they do the storyboards, whether I'm involved or not, but whatever. The storyboards are done, but they never show them to the actors. And you'll sit on a set in the morning when they do a blocking rehearsal with the actors, and 99 times out of 100, the actors go exactly. I'm looking at the storyboards, the actors aren't. But 99 times out of 10, they'll go exactly. In the end, they'll end up where the storyboards have drawn them. You know,
a lot of times in the beginning, they might be all
over the place. But yeah, it's really interesting, the process. You know.
Would anybody else like to ask a question? No, be shy. Yes, Chapin.
That's very much him.
Yeah, same way coming from documentaries.
Yeah. I hate all that stuff. I mean, I know a lot of Bob Richardson. I mean, bless him. He always has the come on, and he's always shouting at his gaffer, and you know. And I no way, you know, no way. I just want to be in my own headspace. So we would sit in this van, and I'd be operating. James would be next to me, and James would be talking to the grips or whoever had the camera, you know.
And the other thing too is oftentimes when you're shooting visual effects or, you know, weighing in and saying, no, you should shoot this with a big blue screen here and you should shoot and put this camera over there. And of course it's not what the DP wants. So that's part of what I do too, is I sit with them and go, okay, so what is it you're trying to do? And can we try it this way? And because I think on a set, you can have actually not a very good relationship between visual effects and the DP, and I'm trying to stop that.
Yeah, well, no. I mean, I think it's this sort of idea of doing as much in camera as possible. And I'm still the documentary guy, really. I'm still that operator, and I don't want to be distracted by all the stuff that's going on the set, especially the politics. So this is a really good relationship for me.
It was funny because on Blade Runner, the visual effects people wanted to do witness cameras. We hadn't done that before. And of course they wanted to use the ARRI camera, and I wouldn't let them because they promised it would never show up in the final footage, but I never believe anyone. So I said, no, and there was one scene that I allowed them to use the ARRI when they meld into each other, because that was a hard scene. But
They only used it as witness camera then.
yeah,
didn't
they did. Yeah, because I also talked to the editor and said if I ever see one of those frames
I
in
mean,
there.
that was a scene, I don't know if I'm getting off tack now, but the melding scene in Blade Runner was a case in point of effects and everything,
Yeah.
and people not really figuring it out. But going back to the basics, going back to what's the simplest way of doing this? Well, you shoot the two women consecutively on the same set in the same lighting, and then you rotoscope them and put them together. And, effects were saying, no, we're going to have blue screen, we've got to see the shot, and then we'll repeat the shot on blue screen a week later so we know exactly what's being used and everything. And we talked to Denny and said, well, we'll do a test. Let's shoot a test, see if it can work on set. And sure enough, we shot a test and it worked. And Denny said, no, we're doing it like that. We're not doing it any
Because
other
there
way.
was a lot of performance in that, and,
Yeah.
and to break it down like that is really bad for the actors.
Yeah,
So,
but I mean, how do you match that kind of light? Because it's also interactive. I mean, I don't know if you
I thought
don't
they
have
did a
exactly
brilliant job on that.
They did
That-
brilliant
that
job.
was Paul.
After saying they couldn't.
Yeah. Well, they're just being careful.
Funny
Yeah.
that.
I like how you're advocating for trying to find a simpler way,
Oh, yeah.
and
Well,
that's
yeah.
often the smarter way.
I think so often people complicate something. Maybe sometimes it's with effects, it's to make their job a bit easier. They want a blue screen. But I remember on Jarhead, we had these battle sequences on this big burn and explosions and stuff. And our effects supervisor for ILM said, well, I've got to have blue screen all around this because we're extending the berm and all this and cutting out the landscape. And I said, well, yeah, that's fine. I don't know if we can afford it because you think the camera's going handheld and we're going to be here this way on a 40 or a 32 and the character's here so you see all that. And then we're going to pan around here and I'm going to walk backwards like this and down the berm. I said, that's kind of a lot of blue screen. And he looked at me and said, okay, you just shoot it and we'll work it out later. And he did fantastic job.
Yeah.
But because half the time they're trying to push to get something really, that makes their job easier. But really, it's about the shoot, isn't it? It's about having all the flexibility on the day, not.
It's that, and it's also important to do as much as you can because you know what the look should be, and you're keeping this sort of continuity of look. And the more that gets put to a visual effects house, sometimes they're great and they do match the look, but other times, especially because they never get them done on time and they're always under the gun, they have to farm it out to different groups, and one group makes it a sunny day, one group makes it not such a sunny day, so it all doesn't match, and it's just better to do it in camera.
That was a great thing on Blade Runner, working with Danny, because he said, yeah, let's do as much as we can, let's build as much. So we built false perspective sets so that we could have, on small stages, but false perspective so we could get as much background as possible. And sure, most of the backgrounds have a little tweak effects-wise, but the majority of it is actually there, and you have a basis for what that look is.
Which is also better for the actor as well, because the actor is actually in the situation.
It's more fun.
Yeah.
Would somebody else like to ask a question? Scott.
Scott Mason, thank you very much for coming. I want to ask you about lens choices because you say you do a lot of prep. And I think I've heard you say you could shoot a whole movie on a 40, and you kind of did with
1917, well,
right.
all but
So-
one take.
And so in prep, are you guys talking, oh, I want to do a 27 close and wide or 40? Are you guys working all that out in prep? And if you could just take me down your process of your lens choices. 'Cause I'd
It
love to
depends
know.
on the film, really. I mean, some films you go slightly longer, like, the first time I worked with Joel and Ethan, they had been working with Barry, and at that point, their favorite lens was like an 18. And I kind of if I find that too much, so on Barton Fink, we kind of settled on a 25 or 28. But then on Hudsucker, I got them more to a 32. And then on Fargo, which they wanted to feel like a documentary drama sort of theater, kind of, we said we were going to shoot on a 40, but then that wasn't true because we went some wider and some longer. But it depends on the film, you know what I mean? It all sort of shifts on the...
Well, and also, don't we choose a lens packet in the once we sort of get an idea of what we're going to be shooting, and then we work within the lenses that we actually have on the truck.
Yeah, I mean, again, we try and keep things to a minimal. It's just nice to have the minimal amount of gear, the minimal amount of number of people you need and everything. And, you know, often we'll go on and shoot without a zoom lens, for instance. I mean, sometimes you know there's one or two shots you might do and you need a zoom for a particular effect. But
you bring it in on the day.
You bring it in, and even long lenses, you bring them in for a day rather than carrying it the whole time.
Well, and also the other thing is if you have a minimal lens packet, you can get a duplicate too, so you have a backup. It's better to have the backup than have more lenses you're not going to use.
Yeah, so we have quite a narrow range of lenses usually, but yeah, as James says, we usually have two sets, you know, backup, or if you're floating one camera to another so you can work quickly, you're not shooting two cameras, but you're just, you know, you're working from one to another.
I just want to note too that it's kind of remarkable for 1917. I think, didn't you shoot with the Arri LF?
Yeah.
Right. So that translates to a little bit wider, but the fact that you're staying with the same lens is kind of remarkable, because what you're doing is you're changing based on blocking, distance, you know, as opposed to quote cheating with like a short zoom or making adjustments.
Yeah. I mean, but we basically storyboarded it with that lens in mind, I suppose, you know, and everything was done with that one lens in mind, except for I said there's one shot we did slightly wider, which is that in the tunnel, when they're in the tunnel with their flashlights, we went slightly wider to get a heightened sense of movement within that space, but that was the only time we cheated.
Anybody else?
He's got a question there. You keep raising your hand.
Well, I think there's two elements there, and I mean that's Denny's sensibility. I think. I mean the work chaotic, and I mean there was the scene in like BB's bar, which was, I mean, more like the street scenes in the original Blade Runner, I suppose. You know, but no, I think it was a very conscious choice on Denny's part to have it very spare. You know, I think that's how he sees. I mean, in terms of lighting and that's just, that's me as well. I like things to be really simple. I like to kind of really whittle it down to the really important elements in a frame. And sometimes you go too far and it becomes too simple, and then you add things just to make it feel more real after you see it. But I don't know. I say mostly that comes from Denny. That came from the writing and of the script. Really.
Well, and also in those months in Montreal, we kind of created a world. So we had created everything that's on the screen. We had talked about it. We had decided that, you know, it would be a lot of atmosphere with just sort of blurred colors in it.
I think one of the things that skewed it more than anything was when we started location scouting. I remember I went to London and then to Slovakia and Hungary with Denis, just looking at things. And it was looking at buildings, and we really kind of honed in towards sort of brutalist architecture, which is like, you know, the South Bank Centre in London, or the big trellis tower blocks and stuff. It's very, very simple, brutal architecture. So it's very spare as well, which is a sort of antithesis of where Ridley went with the look of the streets in his film, you know.
Do you shoot things clean, or do you use any sort of slight diffusion in the front?
What
or
do you
anything?
think?
Probably clean. Yes.
I shot one film in 1986 with a filter on it, and I regret it. I can't watch it. You know. And I think that was the last time I used a filter, other than one or two shots.
And in terms of coloring, do you try to get it exact on the day in the camera, rather than saying, oh, this will really push it in post? Or
It's actually really important these days to do that because it's going through visual effects,
Yes.
so they're using that as a reference.
Okay.
So.
If you watch the dailies of Blade Runner, it's almost exactly the same as the final image. I mean, the only difference is, like, obviously one shot has to go to another, and you might do a little fade on something just to match it out. But I can't think of a scene. A couple of exteriors, maybe the sun came out a bit much, but I can't think of a scene that looked different to the dailies.
Our DI process generally doesn't take that much time, 5 days maybe, but except for the fact that the visual effects aren't ready, so that can be 4 weeks later, so we can't leave until everything's in it. But
do you stick to native ISOs for digital cameras?
Basically, we shoot with Alexa at 800, but I mean, there's some moments where you go 1280 or something like that. I think the interior of the bunker on 1917, we went to 1280. I might have just at the last moment maybe went back to 800. I can't remember now, but no, usually stay the same. I mean, but it's just could have been brought up on film, you know, either shooting on a 100 ASA stock or a 500 ASA stock or whatever, you know, and I kind of see things that way. 800 is faster than I want most of the time.
Chapin.
To circle back to color, like I know Joe Montana was sent out early a lot to work with you guys developing color pipelines before.
Jill was on what?
Or was it Jill? I don't know. Maybe not.
Jill Bogdanovich. She
no,
did.
No, no, never. Yeah.
So with your films, is color, are you building that in pre-production? Or
Building and the lighting and yeah, I mean, it's just what we shot. I mean, it's not shifted by the DIT or anybody.
Yeah.
It's actually what, like, if you've been shooting film and you did a one light color.
you're not building like a show lens or any of that stuff?
No.
We
We
have
have one lot.
And we were working in P3.
Yeah. I mean, we have one lot that we made for in time, the first film we shot digitally. And then we shifted it a little bit for Skyfall, just to enhance the color and make it a little bit more snappy.
And filmic, because we were trying to.
Yeah,
work
and
for filmic.
then for Prisoners we desaturated a tiny bit, but it was one LUT for the whole film. You know, everything else is just done in the lighting and.
You know what's incredibly irritating about timers?
Yeah, incredibly
You want to
irritating.
know? That they say, "Oh, I created that look. Oh, I did this. I did that," and it's just not true. I mean, maybe it's true
maybe
for
it's
other
just something
people.
I think
yeah.
that gives people the wrong idea that, okay, you're going to create the look of the film in your timing, in your DI. I mean, you could say that for Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? But also you could say that we did a lot of tests and we knew exactly what it was going to look like before we got in the thing and started tweaking it.
Right, and you were actually telling them what you wanted. It's not
Yeah,
that
I
they
mean-
were, yeah.
And we sit there every day in timing. I mean, I time every shot. It's not like I go in. It's not even that it was easier doing film because you could say to the timer, well, I want this to be a little darker or whatever. Go away and come back when you see another answer print. But with digital, you've got so much power in that machine. You can so much power to screw it up completely. So I insist on being there timing it. And in the early days of digital timing, we'd be off like in Connecticut we were doing Revolutionary
Rev Road,
Road, and we were in the evenings we were timing Jesse James. because they set up a remote timing suite in an office up there, so we could sit there in the evenings and go through the whole thing. And then James would spend the next day in there working with the notes from the night before. Then I go in again. So, you know, it's really important because, as I say, the power of the machine now is you can go anywhere, can't you?
I guess that's what I meant to ask about, though, is the testing part of that. So, like, when you're shooting tests and then timing those tests to create your one button or whatever, like, do you have any advice or philosophy about that? Or I guess it's just script-based.
But that's implying that the test is timed in some way. The test is only as if we were shooting film. You could just take it out as a one light, and it's what you're shooting. It's not. We're not adjusting it in the system. We're shooting what we want on set. So they're slightly different. You know?
And another reason why that's really important, sorry, getting into my thing, is you want what goes to the editor to be what you want it to be, because if something goes to the editor and you've talked with the director and say, that scene's a little blue, that's okay, I know what it should be. By the time they've lived with it for 6 months and then you come back into the timing suite, they like that blue look. So you want to give it to the editor the way that you want, because they're going to be living with it for so long that if something's wrong, they're going to end up loving that mistake. So we sound like control freaks.
Yeah, but it's I mean, maybe sound like a dinosaur. Maybe that's what you do. You tweak everything in digital, and it's got so much power. And yeah, that's a way of doing it. But I get no satisfaction from that. You know, I like, as James says, I like the director to see what the intent was in the dailies, whether it's film or digital. And the one moment that James, I think, is relating to is there's a shot in Kundun with the boy sleeping at the beginning of the film. And we were in Morocco, obviously, and the dailies were coming back from New York. Great timer was doing it. But this one shot came out a little green, and I thought, I'm not going to bother getting it retimed. I'll do that when we get to the answer printing.
You did talk to Marty about it, too.
I did, yeah. But, you know, like, 4 months later, when it comes to answer printing, and Marty's looking at it, he said, why is that blue-grey? I really liked it was green. I thought, oh, God. And I said, well, I always thought it was going to be blue-grey. And he said, well, okay. He was fine, you know what I mean? But he, as James said, he'd got to love the way it had been.
And I think that another problem these days are there's so many people touching the look afterwards that we try and be involved in the visual effects afterwards. You know, I fight to put it in the contract, but the studios don't want to do that, because even if you say we'll do it for free, they think, oh, they're going to charge us. But to see the visual effects, because it can start going off and you don't realize it till you're in the DI, and it's hard to get it back. And there's visual effects, editors will change things around everybody. And you see it when you go into a movie. Sometimes you'll see a movie and it doesn't have that kind of continuous visual style. And you also can tell when it's been pushed in the DI.
There's a great reference in Blade Runner when Spinner's going across the sort of trashed city, and part of that was a model and this, that, and the other. And anyway, it was all kind of like this grey kind of landscape. And as James said, some of the shots were sent to different houses. And one came back, and Denny said, I don't get it. Why is this shot? It doesn't really work. And what they'd done, they put a setting sun in the background, and there was all this glistening off the kind of water on the ground and stuff. And it looked beautiful. But that was a problem. It looked beautiful, you know what I mean? And it was totally wrong for the scene. And the other shot they'd done was the two upturned radio disc receivers. And they literally put a sun in the sky and amongst the fog. And you go, what are you thinking? I mean, it was beautiful, you know, and the award goes to, but it didn't really fit with the damn film, you know?
Thank you so much for being here. Valea with the Honolulu Film Office. Could you share with us your thoughts about how virtual production is changing the art of cinematography?
Keep
In
keep
5
us off
minutes or
that one.
less.
Virtual production.
What is virtual production?
It's just.
I don't know. What exactly is virtual production? We've never worked on that.
Well, yeah.
I guess the new evolution of green screen and all of the virtual walls, and does that, how does that affect the way that you think about things or approach things, or what sort of level of detail or shift do you need to make when it's in that particular arena?
We've had really nice experiences working on animated films at DreamWorks and at Pixar, right? It's been really nice, but I don't want to do that, shooting what are supposedly live action films. You could see it happening, but it doesn't interest me. I'm still the guy, I'm still the documentary cameraman. I want it to be there, Sure, I think they're all good tools, but it's like when the Steadicam was invented, everybody's kind of shooting the film on a Steadicam and finding the shot because you can do anything you want, move anywhere you want, but that's not interesting. I think that's derogation of responsibility, or whatever the phrase is.
So we've never worked with big LED screens, but we've been, we were visiting a studio and they really wanted to show us, so we went on to the set, and I'm not sure I could stand a day in that kind of light. It just was really irritating.
I thought I think what Greg Fraser did with it on Batman, doing that sunset stuff. I mean, that was a fantastic use of that technology. But as James says, where does, when does it? Why don't you just do it as an animated film? I mean, animate the whole thing. Use AI. Create Tom Cruise. You can do anything you want. No, I think that's what's going to happen. That's what my honest opinion is. I think that's how films are going to be made in the future, no doubt about it. Not all films, but.
Yeah, it's hard to say what's going to happen, but it does seem like it's going that way, and I think you'll get much more generic looks, which is a shame,
One more? Okay.
Hello, I'm Raymond Red, director and cinematographer from the Philippines. My question is, you've actually spoken a lot about it earlier already, but it must be a tired subject now, but I really honestly want to hear your thoughts on celluloid, on film. Everybody's always debating on that until now, even though digital has taken over. And recently I saw this HBO camera assessment film, and they still had film. They still had Kodak compared with 5 of the top of the line digital cameras. So I just was wondering what your thoughts are on that.
I thought Tangerine looked fantastic. Shot on an iPhone, wasn't it?
You have to remember that what you're shooting on is a tool. So there are people that worship film, but it's just a tool for telling your story. And the reality is that you don't have the backup on film that you used to. You don't have the labs that you used to. You don't have the technicians in Kodak that you used to. I mean, the last thing we shot was Hail Caesar. We had a problem, and it took me 3 weeks to figure it out because no one in Kodak could figure it out because they'd all gone digital. So film is great, and I think more people should know film because then they'll understand about exposure and getting it right. But you can't look down on something because it's shot digital if some beautiful things are shot digitally and vice versa. So
I think it's sad there's such an obsession on film, digital, or technology in general, whether it's the volume or whatever, and nobody's thinking about what we're making a film about.
that's true.
I got it. Thank you all so much for coming. We are going to wrap now. I know can you hold up that book? No, that's not Chapin. I know. Yes. So, Team Deakins has recently created this book by ways of their photographs. We had a book signing yesterday at the shop, which is across the street on Harding. They do have extra copies there if you guys want to pick up that book, support local bookstores. I recommend you do that. It's a great book. And can we get one more round of applause? And thank you so much. And thanks to Anne as well.
Thank you. Thank you both.
And check out more programs, HIFF.org. We do industry events all year round, so check out High Film Industry. Thank you guys. Yeah.
I just want to say one quick thing. It's really an honor for both of you to share your time with us and your expertise. Thank you so much on behalf of our community. I do want to say that we have such an amazing community of filmmakers and just film supporters, and that the voices that are coming out now are amazingly strong. And I hope that we can continue the kind of ohana we have, which is that we can be supportive of each other, and I think we can. So just wanted to, since we're all here, just to say thank you guys. Like keep going and keep supporting each other, and lots of love. Yeah.